and welcome to our podcast, Occultism with a Side of Salt. My name is Aiden,
And I'm Georgina.
and today we're going to be discussing the topic of the term baby witches.
And how it's kind of problematic and is very vastly overused these days, and why we believe that for about 9 million different reasons. I think both of us could talk about this for probably 20,000 years, a few aeons. But before that, we should probably explain who we are, since this is our first episode.
Alright, I'll start. I'm Aiden. I consider myself to be a traditional Solomonic practitioner. I'm very ceremonial. I've been practicing for about 4 years. I'm very planetary, and I consider myself a Thelemite. My matron is Chaos, the Greek goddess, and I work heavily with the planetary god Mercury. I also work with various other spirits, such as the demon Stolas from the Lesser Key of Solomon.
Yeah, I'm Georgina. I've also been doing it for around 4 years. I really work very heavily with Appalachian folk traditions, since I'm from there, and kind of all the various aspects of that, which kind of like a mix between various conjures, herbalism, some Abrahamic work. And on top of that, I practice a lot of Kabbalah in kind of the more ecstatic variances of it, and then kind of splashes of random shit here and there. I've worked in like all sorts of group settings I pretty much dabbled with most currents out there at some point. I'm what you call all over the placest, but I make it work.
A very base system.
Yes, I don't even know what I am at this point. I'm something. I exist.
Labels aren't real anyways.
So I've noticed all over online forums with the younger, or not even younger, like these people are in their like 20s and 30s, who really rely on calling themselves baby witches when they're not children.
Yeah, definitely. I think part of where people get it is that when you start looking up witchcraft, it's one of the first terms that people kind of learn. It's you
Yeah,
go you go and you look at into witchcraft, and one of the first things you find is, oh, a person who's just starting on witchcraft is a baby witch or a witchling or some other variant of the term.
which is interesting because I never hear that term going around kind of communities with a lot of like that have a longer lineage running with them, or that are older groups like the Gardnerians and the orders I know, which I find very interesting because I feel like it's kind of one of these more new agey, not new age, but like 21st century witch things.
Yeah, it's definitely more modern, a lot more 21st century. I wouldn't say exactly new age, but
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like new age movement. It's like, I don't want to say Tumblr. I really don't want to say that because I don't want to sound elitist. But kind of that current of things.
yeah.
Like the like very, like the crystal crowd.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Keep saying the crystal crowd. Anyways, so this term is pretty problematic in my opinion. I think that like it it gets into a lot of other issues I think that I have with the modern scene, to be completely honest. But like it just like people use this term as such a crutch. Like I'll be giving someone advice and they'll be like, "Oh no, well I'm just a baby." And I'm like, "Well, you still need to be able to take criticism to grow."
Right. And I think one thing that really bothers me about it is that it's not something you see in other practices. Like, you don't say, oh, I'm a baby artist. It's like, I'm a beginner artist. And
Yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought of it at that angle.
yeah, witchcraft is a practice. It's not something that you're like a baby at it. You aren't born and then suddenly like, you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. It's not like there's nothing baby about it, and these people use this to like as like a protective thing, I think.
Definitely. It shields them from criticism and it honestly stifles their growth as well.
Oh, absolutely, because these people are like, well, I've been practicing for 4 years, but I'm a baby, so I can't do that.
Yeah, well, we'll see people who are being like, who say that they've been practicing for X number of years, usually not double digits, and they're like, but I've never done a spell, or I have only done a few spells, I can't really do that much. But then I'm here, or I've been practicing for about 4-ish years, and I've been doing Solomonic practices. I've been doing a lot of highly ceremonial things that most people who claim to be baby witches just can't seem to fathom doing, which I think is very toxic for people's growth because once you get into the mindset of, oh, I'm baby, it's hard to get out of that because it's like, I need to get to this arbitrary point before I can actually start doing all these different things.
Yeah, which, like, I agree with. I think that there is the importance of you don't want to jump into things too fast, and I do think, like I have respect for people who do like the year and a day type thing where they like do like less intensive practices at first and slowly work up. But those people have a trajectory of what they're trying to achieve. They're not like saying that they're a baby forever because these people really like everyone I know who's a baby beginner tends to stay there, which I don't want to sound like a bitch, but it's like, yeah, don't fucking break out the lesser key of Solomon your first week, but like if it's been 4 years, 5 years, and you haven't done more than like maybe an occasional Sabbath working, that's kind of concerning to me.
Definitely. Because if you aren't actively trying to grow in your craft, if you're only doing these smaller things, well, there's nothing wrong with with smaller workings, with smaller practices. If you aren't trying to grow yourself, then you aren't really growing as a person and you aren't growing in your practice, which I think can be very dangerous, honestly, because you're not opening yourself up to all these different practices, all these different styles, and you just get stuck in your own. This is how I've always done it, so I'm going to keep.
Absolutely. Like I was talking to someone and they were saying like they didn't want to start doing sigils because it was too much of a push for them, and I'm like,
That's my first spell was a sigil.
yeah, sigils are like week one. I mean, sigils are valuable. I'm not saying sigils are bad. You don't stop doing sigils, but like, yikes! That was a very yikes conversation. I was like, oh god. Also, I think this gets into people who are kind of. A lot of people use this to protect themselves with their own fear of practicing, because I think a lot of people are scared of practicing.
Yeah, there's a lot of stigma in society in general where it's like witchcraft and magic as a whole is this very alluring thing, yet there's also this sense of fear and terror, which I think comes from a lot of the honestly propaganda, where it's like if you do witchcraft, you're going to hell. If you do witchcraft, you're worshiping the devil. Blah 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 blah, so on and so forth. That it really isn't true, because you can't really worship the devil if you don't believe in the devil, like with Wiccans. And I think that a lot of people are genuinely scared of practicing because of their more traditional Abrahamic backgrounds that a lot of people come from. Because most people who claim to be baby witches are like, oh, I'm ex-Christian, or I'm ex-Catholic, or I'm ex-Mormon, ex-Jewish sometimes, or ex-Islamic. These very more hard-set traditional Abrahamic beliefs, which there's nothing wrong with those beliefs, but I do feel that a lot of people get stuck in the if I do witchcraft, I'm displeasing towards God, I'm displeasing towards Yahweh, or I'm displeasing towards, pick your monotheistic sky daddy.
Which absolutely, like I think to an extent that fear is valid. I deal with it in the back of my subconscious at times, but like people need to realize that it's not like that. That there are many things in the Bible that point to like okay, Jesus was absolutely a witch. You can't prove me wrong on that. And there's also so much of a rich occult history and even those practices that it's it's really not true if you look between the lines. But, and also I think it gets into, with the ex-Christians, I think that these people are very scared of the societal reactions and whatnot, and very scared of like familial pressure one way or another. Because I get being nervous about pushback, because I think that at some point you're going to have someone accuse you of being a Satanist or something like that. You're going to have that conversation in your life. I'm not super blatantly open to everyone I know, honestly. Like, I'm open if you ask me, but I don't really push my practice ever, so I haven't had a ton of them, thankfully, but I've had it. Like, it's very real, but I think that these people who also, it also kind of gets into the whole idea of being closeted with your practice and being too scared because of Christian parents, as if you can't, I'm not supposed to suggest this, but work around that, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. I live in a very Catholic household. We go to church every Sunday. My parents have signed me up for pretty much every Christian youth group thing, and hell, I'm even the president of my church's youth group, so I definitely get it. I get that it's not the easiest thing in the world to live in a very Christian household and practice witchcraft, but it's something you need to work around, and it's something that if you're creative enough and if you have enough confidence in yourself, honestly, you can do it. Because I'll hear people who be like, I can only do this when my parents are out or when they're asleep, and while those are honestly the best times to work, I've been able to practice when my parents are home. And it's really just about being cunning and knowing how to hide things more. And also understanding that witchcraft doesn't take all these different tools. It doesn't need all these different specific super ultra rare herbs that you can only get in China and Africa. You can do
Even almost gets into the issue of people becoming so obsessed with the material aspects of it and spending a ton of money. Like you see if you go on Etsy, these like $150, $200 kits, and these people think that they can't do anything without that, as if our ancestors haven't been doing spiritual practice with almost nothing for millennium. And if anything, we're extremely spoiled nowadays.
Like I remember going on Etsy the other day, and I was looking for black mirrors. It was like because I wanted a black mirror, and they're like $200, and then I just made one the other day for basically free. It, all these different tools are really useful. They can help you in your practice, but they aren't essential, and they shouldn't be that costly. Like, if you want a wand, just go outside and pick up a stick, decorate it, and really just make it personal. Personalizing your tools is way more important than getting the fancy, like super ultra expensive $1,000 wands, athenes, etc.
Yeah, I think that Etsy and Instagram, which I think this gets into the Instagram issue, where it's like that's not what the soul of what we're doing is, and I think that people get really distracted by that. And I think these baby uwu types are the most susceptible to that type of stuff, and like the aesthetic crowd with influences from like Harmony Nice and such.
I think because people who are just starting don't know where to look, they go to these more Instagram aesthetic people. They go to these more, here's all my beautiful wands, here's my altar, and it's like perfect, pristine, almost artistic in a sense. Like, if you look at a lot of people who are doing the more Instagram aesthetic witchcraft, they're also most likely art students. And they have all these different things that, while it looks nice, they aren't essential. Like, you don't need to have all these tools to do basic spell work, which I think a lot of people don't really understand.
Yeah, it's also something I've noticed is people try to build altars and sacred spaces first before knowing what those things are for. Like, those tools all have specific purposes, and I don't understand why you would buy them just to have these aesthetic altars and then just not use them. Same thing with moon water. I mean, Like everyone makes moon water. But what are you using it for? If you don't know what you're doing with a supply before you buy it or what you're going to do with it, why would you buy it?
Start making moon water for a while because, in all honesty, I didn't know what it was for. Because I would see all these people who would be like, oh, you should make moon water. I'm like, what the fuck is that?
Ever once used moon water in my 4 years of practice. I've never heard anyone at a moot or public ritual talk about them.
In my opinion, it's not really the most essential thing for your craft. And I think that's also a thing that comes into play is that not every tool is essential. Not everything is essential to your specific craft. And a lot of the tools are from the Wicca tradition, which, if you're not Wiccan, you don't need all the tools from that.
Absolutely. And even some of the Wiccans and Gardnerians I know don't use I don't know many Wiccans who actually use the pentacle that they have for their altar, like the altar tile. You know what I'm talking about? Because there's the chalice. I think everyone listening to this knows the basic Wicca setup. Like, what are you using that for besides just a point? But even then, most of the time during rituals, they don't actually use those objects in the points of the room. They just call to the watchtowers and the corners in each direction by turning. And you only really pass the fire and the water elements around the circle when you're casting the circle. So I don't think that buying a pentacle is the most useful supply. Also, if you're buying a chalice, just buy a cup. Buy a cup you can drink from. Not like my aesthetic one that's very impractical and is way too small to drink from. Kind of useless. I'm guilty of this. I'm calling myself out with this point.
Like, I was at a dollar store the other day, and I could just see all these different tools that could be used, and I'm like, there's your chalice, there's your wand, there's your athame, there's my black mirror.
I actually just went on Etsy and I found a $300 black mirror.
It's not that expensive to make it yourself. You get a picture frame, you take out the glass, you paint the back of the glass black, and then if you want to, you can put your preferred god names around the picture frame. At most $10.
Yeah, also I was going to talk about kind of everyone's favorite topic when it comes to this stuff, oppression.
Oh, God.
So, baby witches tend to have the oppression complex very, very strong. When occult acceptance is so much better than what it used to be, like some of the elders in my community who I know have talked about literally almost losing their jobs back in the 60s and 70s because of where they were in time then. And it was so stigmatized to be an occultist. Everyone thought you were like some sort of crazy Satanist. Like, these people act like it's still the satanic panic, and it's not.
It isn't. No, if you live in the 21st century in 2020, you probably know what Wicca is. You probably know what Wicca is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everyone I know knows what Wicca is. I'll mention that I practice this stuff and they're like, oh, okay. They just assume I'm a Wiccan and they're fine with it. Though I'm not Wiccan, but you know what I mean.
It's not like we don't have witch hunts daily. We don't have like people who are hiding their practice in fear of being killed, which, was an actual thing.
Oh, absolutely. It was a thing, and I think it's disrespectful almost that these people are like on Tumblr going, oh my god, my mom found my tarot cards and grounded me for a week. I'm about to be burnt at the stake. Oh my god.
That's such a whole other level of disrespect.
Also, tangent. People claiming that the Salem witch trials has anything to do with neo-paganism is awful.
God, yeah. Anyone who says that, please pick up a fucking history book. Please actually read about the Salem witch trials. The Salem witch trials was not about actual witchcraft.
No, it has. They weren't
It was.
pagan. Nobody in that was
They weren't.
pagan. And even if there was witches, which there historically were not, and there very obviously were not, they would be essentially Abrahamic satanic practitioners, which did exist. Historically, they did exist, but they're definitely not the people who were killed in the Salem witch trials.
No.
Absolutely not. There were no pagans in Salem, Massachusetts at that time. Pretty much every strand of American folk magic and history and folk practice is Abrahamic.
Actually.
That it's European paganism that's the big influence on modern neo-paganism.
It's really, really saddening to see people who will claim heritage, honestly, with the Salem witch trials. I'm like, no, that had nothing to do with witchcraft. That had nothing to do with modern day magic. It had nothing to do with paganism at all. It had everything to do with Assyria and the general misogynistic beliefs at the time.
No, it's not to do with neo-paganism. My God. Definitely not to do with Wicca. Wicca didn't even exist.
People who think Wicca is an actual ancient practice, open a fucking book. It's not that old. I believe it was started in the 50s, if I'm recalling correctly.
Gardner went public with it in about it was the 47, 46, I think, but it's speculated Gardner was practicing it starting in the 30s.
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
But people didn't know about it until about 50s, 60s, 70s. And it didn't become well known until the 90s.
Oh god, yeah.
But Wicca is very, very young. Wicca is not ancient. Wicca is very far from ancient. Wicca is honestly mostly... I mean, granted, what is true traditional practice because the records have largely been destroyed. So it's really kind of impossible to come up with authentic traditional practice. Unless you're only referencing the PGM.
Referencing the PGM, you're pretty much not going to go that far, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, what's the oldest document we have? Probably the PGM.
Yeah.
And then, because sabbatic traditional stuff, which I think what most people, when they talk about traditional practice, kind of the sabbatic currents, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That is, the historicism of that is even a tricky topic, to be honest. It's, a lot of that practice and those practices are very tainted by propagation against them. And there weren't many records of any of that, written down, because these people were, going to be killed if they talked about what they were doing.
Definitely.
So even then, what is true traditional practice? So there's no real way to create a clean lineage to the oppressed pagans of 2,000, 3,000 years ago. In my opinion. That's just me.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to claim that same oppression, especially today, when you can Google witchcraft and you'll get resources.
Oh, absolutely. Nobody in 2020, except maybe if you're in the Middle East.
No one in no one in the West. Yeah. There are some countries where you will most definitely face oppression, but if you're living in the UK, Canada, America, you're 99% not going to face any actual oppression, and the most oppression you'll face is maybe some social scuffles.
Yeah, and some judgment. It's not like it's the 1960s when some people genuinely lost their jobs and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, now the worst that happens is I guess you can't go into politics because there was that Republican candidate who said she used to dabble in the occult who got really shit on.
Oh yeah.
That was 10 years ago though. That's not recent.
Yeah, I think that as the future progresses, there will be a lot more people who will be practitioners of witchcraft who will be like even just pagan, not specifically practicing witchcraft, who can run for political office, who will get elected because people are just going to stop caring at some point. Like, I hate to say it, but like a lot of the older generation is much more Abrahamic and would be less willing to vote into office someone who is a pagan because that's just how they grew up. But even then, I don't think people will care in the next 20, 30 years.
Oh, absolutely. The older generation are the ones that have an issue with it because they associate it with like hippies and stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Like the older people in the community who I know, like it's different for them, but they talk about how much better it is now and how lucky it is for young people now. And I mean, like, the community's also changed a lot. I think that like lineaged practices are really fading out of favor. Yeah, I mean, like I think the rise of modern practice, I think that's the majority of people are solitary now. I think lineages are fading away. I think that stuff just is no longer necessary for people to learn, so people aren't going to it. Because if they go to those practices, then they kind of have to start at a beginner level that most people who are serious enough to seek out that stuff are beyond.
Yeah.
Because, like, if you go to, like, an order or something, or, like, a Gardnerian group, you're going to be taught, like, LBRPs and circles for quite some time. And I think most people don't want to learn at that pace because they can learn so much faster on the internet. Term is just, yeah, it just stifles people so much, and it holds people back. And it's this attitude of these ooh-woos, like, just take your shit seriously. I know that you're very lucky to be practicing now where you don't have to, like, go to 19 metaphysical stores and, like, whisper behind the counter, how do I contact the Gardnerians?
Yeah. I think people really, really underestimate how privileged we are today to be able to have access to all these different sources. You can say that you practice. You don't have to explicitly say you practice witchcraft, but you can say that you meditate with crystals, you meditate with candles, you do yoga, you do all these different things that, unless you're like in a hyper super hardcore Christian community where if you even mention D&D, you're going to be gaslit, which if you are, please seek help.
Keep that dark-sided things out of my home. That is dark-sided.
That's the devil's work right there.
Dark-sided. If anyone gets the dark-sided reference, A plus. A plus. Yeah, I mean, like, I feel like if you still say you practice witchcraft, people still give you the okay look. But, like, I could fucking walk around and say, I'm a tarot reader. I have an astrological calendar on my wall. I go to occult stores. I even can say I go to pagan rituals. And people don't even really bat much of an eye. If you say the word witch, you still kind of get a weird look. But it's not like people are going to be like, well, I can't be your friend. Guess she's dark-sided.
Like, people who I've talked to about my practice, they're usually interested more than anything else. They'll be like, oh, that's really interesting. I've been interested in that. Or, oh, can you teach me more about that? Or, in all honesty, I haven't had that many people give me backlash. Like, I've had people who'll be like, okay, just don't summon demons. They don't know about Stolas.
Just don't summon a demon on me. That's beautiful. Honestly. Yeah, I think the worst reactions I've had is I did have one person ask me if I was a Satanist. Someone I was dating actually was the one who asked me if I was a Satanist. Because I was talking about venerating Saturn, actually. And they're like, isn't that Satan? And I'm like, well, no. But, I mean, I've never had, like, a horrible reaction. Like, I lended my mom my copy of the Sefer Yetzirah, and she's Christian, so...
Not that hard. Like, there's a few things I do have to hide,
Oh yeah,
but
I don't like walk around saying my practice. I go, yeah, I'm Georgia. I read tarot. I go to rituals occasionally. I like astrology. But like I don't I'm not talking about everything I do. Certain things I'm not talking about on this podcast.
like, you don't have to be open. I think another thing too that people don't understand. This goes more into closeted witch than baby witch, but I think a lot of people.
I think they're all so related. We can kind of talk on all the areas.
I think a lot of people have this notion. This also comes from me being in the LGBT community. That a lot of people have this notion that you have to come out, that you have to tell people that you're a witch. Similarly, as in the LGBTQ, that you have to come out as pick your identity here. You don't. You don't have to tell everyone. Yeah. Like, I choose to tell people that um, I practice. I usually say I practice more traditional things, or I'll say I practice witchcraft, I practice magic, occultism, things like that. Or if they ask, people have asked this and it's really interesting. I'll say I practice Thelema. And
Oh, Thelema has a very strong stigma to it if someone knows what Thelema is, which most people don't.
but like similarly, if someone asks, I'll be open about my personal identity. And it's really just how comfortable you are with yourself rather than you need to do this. You don't need to tell everyone about your practice. You don't need to tell everyone about your identity as a whole.
Also, I think you need to, unlike your sexuality, there's no time when you'll need to say you practice. Like, if you're gay and you have a boyfriend and you're having a wedding, people are going to have to know you're gay. But there's no point in your practice where you need to tell everyone. And I'd say the majority of practitioners aren't that open with everyone in their life. They're only open to the people close to them, and that's not like an issue. I feel like there's no need to do this whole weird coming out of the closet thing with your religious practice. Like, most people think it's impolite to talk about your religion in public all the time.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, it almost is like missionary level if you're posting on Instagram. Today I am coming out as a Wiccan. I worship Freya and my left hand.
I mean, that's a pretty good path.
That was a bad joke, but it's not like being gay. There's no point where people are gonna be like needing to know. You can just say you're pagan, also, like, or say you practice an alternative, or say you're spiritual but not religious.
Me what
if
my
people ever
quote new religion
directly
is. If they
ask you.
found out that I'm ex-Catholic, I'm like, oh, I'm more. I just lost the word. I'll say, like, if I don't want to say full on, I believe in Thelema or I'm a Thelemite and things like that, I'll say I'm pagan or I practice alternative religion. Or I'll just say I'm spiritual and finding my own path.
I think that's like a perfect answer and people won't ask more. I think saying you're a Thelemite specifically super publicly could be riskier than other traditions because of some of the stuff that Thelemic practice contains and because of Thelema's history with the U.S. government.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I've had people ask me some really uncomfortable questions, like, oh, so you practice things like sex magic and things like that. And it's just something that it comes with a lot of baggage, and sometimes I'm not always prepared for that, which is something I'm working on, is not being so like, yes, I practice Thelema, I believe in all these different things. Here is the directions to the nearest OTO lodge. Please join us. Let's talk about the self-deprecating aspects of being a baby witch, because that's one thing that I've noticed a lot, is that people who say that they're a baby witch, they will always be like, I can never achieve this level of thing. I can never be like this person in the occult community. And it's just like, you can.
You absolutely can. Anyone can do it. Like, maybe some people need more structure. I think if you're someone who really needs like structure, you should probably approach a more traditional way of going about the occult where they have a degree system and they literally teach you things and have a strict progression. Like, anyone can do this shit. There's no gatekeeping there. And I feel like these people are convinced they can't do it because they, like, the first pagan prayer they didn't work or whatever.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Like, I think one thing that really bugs me personally is when people say that they wish they could be at my level when I've been only doing this for 4 years. I am I am not even close to knowing everything that I want to know. I'm not close to achieving half the stuff that I wish I could achieve. But when people who are, especially people who are older than me, because I've had this happen too, where people who are older than me, like adults, will be like, I wish I could be at your level. I'm like, you can. You just apply yourself. Take your practice seriously and work to where you want to go. Figure out what it is you want for your life and go for it. Shoot for the stars. Like, it's, I don't want to say that it's easy, but it's not the hardest thing in the world to start practicing, to get better at your craft, to hone yourself and really apply yourself to what you want to do. Because I'm the person who, in my like first 3 weeks of practicing, tried to invoke one of the Loa because I wanted a boyfriend. Like, I am. Well, I have so many cringe stories about myself. It's really cursed. But when I started to get more serious about my practice, when I really started to apply myself and started to learn what I wanted to learn, that's when I started progressing. That's when I started advancing myself for my own purposes, not because someone on the internet told me to do it, but because I wanted to do it. This is what interests me. This is where I'm comfortable with practicing, and so I'm going to try it.
Yeah, I think that's all it is. I think that there's no like gift that anyone has or anything ridiculous. I think it's just work and time.
Like, it's like any practice. You can't pick up a pencil and paint the Mona Lisa.
Really not. It's just time, practice, years. There's nothing really mystical about it. It's just fucking do the thing.
Just apply yourself and work. Don't self-deprecate either, in general, because when you say, I can't do this, I will never achieve this, then you won't, because you already set yourself the expectation that you won't.
Absolutely. Anyone can do it. There's nothing that crazy about it. Just give it time.
And when people say that they're like a baby, that they can't do this because they're a baby, it really just kind of reminds me of the same kind of people who are interested in trying anything, in all honesty, but they say that they can't because they aren't. Like, you know what I mean? I see this a lot in the art community, actually, where people will be like, I want to be an artist, but I can't because I'm not an artist. It's like, you choose to be an artist, you choose to be a witch, you choose to be anything, and you are one, and you work better at it. You practice, it takes time. You're not going to be Solomon in your first week.
Absolutely not. And I'm still honestly a beginner in a lot of ways. I think with everything I do, it's like I definitely am guilty of self-deprecation holding me back. It's one of my biggest faults. But like, just give it time. Time, bro. Time does a lot.
Even if it isn't real, time is...
Time, consistency, discipline.
I think the biggest thing for people is the idea of daily practice is daunting. The idea that you can incorporate things daily is daunting because I hate to say it, but it's a lot of work and people don't want to put in the effort for doing daily practice, for waking up in the morning and even like just saying a prayer to your preferred deity.
I think it It is daunting to a lot of people because I think it's easier to be a Sabbath witch.
Easier to be a once a month witch. I think that's a term that I've heard of before. Like, where you do one big thing on the full moon, then don't practice until the next full moon or new moon, or pick your astrological thingy.
Yeah, I know many people who are like that. And I think it's just being a baby is bullshit. You've already been born.
You don't need to be born again. You just need to grow up. You need to take your practice seriously. And you need to understand that while you will be a beginner in some aspects, you're not a baby. You don't need someone to hold your hand and do all the work for you. You need to own your practice, own yourself, and really work to better yourself in your practice, because that's what it's all about. It's about bettering your practice, not anyone else's, not being told what to do, which I think is one thing that a lot of people don't seem to understand, is that no one can tell you how to practice. No one can tell you what to believe. No one can tell you this is what will happen if you do this. I will, okay, I'm going to watch my wording here. I will say that magic is a science and an art because of my personal experiences with it, but in another sense, it's not a scientific method exactly. You put in certain things and you get out certain results, yes, but not everything will be the same for each person. Not every person's quote unquote experiment will go the same way. You might do a money petition spell and get $1 billion in a week. Very unlikely, but possible. And then I might do one and get no money in a month. It's really just dependent.
We've talked for about an hour, I think.
51 minutes and 6 seconds.
I think that's really the core of the issue. I think we've really broken it down. And I think that any baby ooh-woo witch who's listening to this, just use the term beginner. That's all. And you're always going to be a beginner. There's no point when you cease to be a beginner. Really, if you think about it, because no one ever knows everything.
In all honesty, when we get down to it, being a beginner it's not a criticism against yourself. It's just understanding yourself more in a way. Like, you understand that you're not ready for certain larger practices. You're not ready for certain deeper things. Like, you're not going to cross the abyss in your first week of practice. If you do, please see a therapist immediately.
Please see a therapist. Please don't do that. Please, not even in your first few years.
There's certain practices that are barred off from beginner people because...
And should be.
Yeah, because there's a danger that does come with practicing. That's something that should be understood. It's not... You can't just get away with doing anything and expect no consequences, expect everything to go perfectly smoothly, because with real life, that's not going to happen anyways. Like, you can't expect to not know how to drive and drive a car flawlessly. We go back to this car metaphor a lot, actually.
Yeah, because I think it fits. So yeah.
Know who you are, know what your skill level is, and understand that we're all beginners in some sense, and we all have room to grow, but you're not a baby. You have all your power already. There's no power level, skill grader thing. It's just your level of understanding, really. How much you understand and how much you're ready for. And once you understand that, you can really go anywhere with it.
I agree. This has been our podcast. I hope you have a lovely day, night, afternoon, whatever it is, wherever you are. And we'll see you again soon.
Have a safe and blessed day.